kind of wish and hope that, you'll have these two kids that kind of cheer you on and go have fun and go win some trophies, but they'll just cry and they have no idea. They're like, where are you going? How long are you going to go for? When are you going to be back? So definitely put things in perspective, finding ways to stay engaged with the kids. It was quite easy when they were, 0 to 5 and then 5 to 10. 10 to 15 is getting hard, so I need to find a new way to stay engaged and to keep connected with them. You can hope that you're being a good parent and you're raising these standards, and me and my wife talk about, like, have I given them enough tools, to go out into the big bad world.
Hey, welcome to Parents We've Met, where we chat with parents about the journey of parenthood, the juggle and the mess, the joy and the magic. Now, as always, you're hanging out with me, Mum to Two and Parenting Place presenter. And to my side over here, we have got author and senior parent coach, Jenny Hales. So welcome. Now, I'm pumped about today's chat. This chat is one for all parents and caregivers, but especially one dedicated to the dads out there. So make sure you share it with a dad that you know. Now, today's guest captained the All Black Sevens team for almost a decade, playing 89 tournaments, 512 games, 153 tries. I feel like I have to have some stats in there for the dads. Winning Commonwealth gold and too many medals to name in a podcast introduction. He was named International Sevens Player of the Year in 2008, as well as New Zealand Samoan Sportsperson, and New Zealand Sevens Player of the Year in 2007, 8, 2014, in 2017. Welcome to Parents We've Met, DJ Forbes. Cool to have you here.
Thank you. That's a very kind intro.
I feel like, I don't know, like when I talk to guys I know, they love the stats. So I'm not normally a stats person, but it just shows how long your career was and just all those hours, those tries. There's a lot that goes into that. So cool to have you with us.
No, grateful to be here.
Now, we've got so much to talk about today, but I wanted to start it with this question. What has tested your patience more over the years, the fans and the critics of Sevens rugby, or your kids?
Probably going to have to say fans. Critics, I guess that's part and parcel of our sport, but I guess it's frustrating because you can't really do too much. You can do what you can on the field, but besides that, they're always going to have their opinion. With the kids at home, probably can do a little bit more to try and make sure that everything aligns. But this has probably been the most exciting part of my career as a dad, and like you, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it later, but trying to use as much as I can from my experiences on the footy field and applying some of those attributes along the way with my kids.
Nice. Parent coach approach, Jenny.
I love it. DJ, we would love to hear a little bit about your whānau, and maybe include in that, what do you do on a weekend? What does a weekend look like in your family?
Well, I think for me it's quality time. So I'm quite a chill, relaxed dad. So any opportunity really to spend time with my wife Lisa, our boy Titus who's 16, and our girl Sarai who's 13. Obviously, there's probably a little period where I was away playing footy. So wherever I can make up time and try and make some more memories is a key part of what I do now, and that's kind of how I fill my cup. I think if there's any kind of opportunities to take my kids on some of the things I do for work, then that's kind of the next phase to it all. But just trying to make sure that they can appreciate the little things like being home with dad, and I can appreciate it in the same way is key.
Cool.
Love that. Love the ordinary things that we can weave into our connection with our kids. What's it like having teens in the house?
Yeah, just probably interesting, kind of experience over these last few years. So a 16 and a 13-year-old, boy and girl, and they're both, in my opinion, sitting on both ends of the spectrum in terms of demands and what they need and what they're going through and things like that. So I'm grateful to have a wife who's my teammate in this sport we play called parenting. And but I think just for me it's been a real eye opener. Like I say, how different my son and my daughter are, and trying to meet them, I guess, in the middle, as well as still trying to keep some boundaries and things that are stock standard for them, regardless of age, stage, and whatever. So that's a kind of a key part, I think, to how I approach it anyway, because I know I'm not always going to get it right, but if I can kind of keep a little bit of consistency, I've learned that in sport, you're going to get some results along the way somewhere. So we try and keep a few things as consistent as possible, and as well as when it's time for me to say I'm wrong or to change things in order to accommodate them, then, that needs to be done as well.
You mentioned, just that quality time because you were away a lot. What was it like those first years when you became a dad and you still had training and games away and a lot to juggle?
Well, I guess, in terms of my why and why I got out of bed was, it changed when I was, I guess, just me and my wife or me and my partner, sort of you're playing to, I guess, bit of self-worth and improving your point that you could play at the highest level and, compete on the international stage and represent your country and things like that. But as, we had our firstborn, that definitely changed. So reminding myself why I'm getting out of bed and leaving the family behind and why I'm sort of playing through injuries and all these other kind of things kind of started to become a lot clearer. So I think that was really hard in terms of, starting to leave and, spending time away. And then probably where it got really hard was obviously having my daughter and having two kids left behind, and then getting the video, time, face calls and things like that was changing the dynamic around, you kind of wish and hope that, you'd have these two kids that kind of cheer you on and go have fun and go win some trophies, but they'll just cry and they have no idea. They're like, where are you going? How long are you going to go for? When are you going to be back? So, definitely put things in perspective and kind of made me, I guess, just warrant the time that I was away or what I was doing and making sure that it was going to be worthwhile.
I was reading an interview with your wife and she shared not everyone gets to live out their dream. So when you love someone, you release them to do what it takes to make it happen. She sounds like the ultimate teammate. But I can imagine, like she had your back, but there would have been probably a whole village around her, helping out with the kids when you're away. Yeah,
and I think, she's definitely carried the family for many years. And we're pretty fortunate in those early days, both our mums were available. So there were the classic drop-offs and pickups and requests and phone calls, for our mums in particular, if they could look after the kids, and like any, grandparent, they love that opportunity. So, that was a luxury, I think, to have them available to do that. I guess now, obviously, it's a bit more around how do we find the balance, because, unfortunately, I've got a couple of kids that are, in that space sort of, they've either got a lot of sport to do or they've got other things to do. So when you're trying to say, hey, go and see grandma, and, the grandma's asking, come and see your nana, it's not as easy as it used to be. And so, trying to obviously, remind them and, of what the grandmas did for them in those early days, as well as, giving our mums their flowers when they want to see their grandbabies that are 16 and 13-year-olds. That's been pretty tough, to be fair, because you want to, how I was brought up, you kind of sit and wait on, anything that grandma needs. Whereas my two kids in particular, I'm just trying to navigate that to say, hey, go and spend some time, we've got to take you and go see nanas and things like that, which has been tough, but just sort of reminding them, the part that both nanas played in their upbringings.
My in-laws live in Australia, and trying to get my kids to FaceTime them, I had to have a whole little talk, and some talking points of what they could share. And we're going to, it's tricky.
I like it when my grandkids come and see me. And as they get older, it does get harder to find that little space. And we found going for a walk the other day a really good way to do it. And then, of course, it's got to be food as well, going out for dinner. That seems to help as well. DJ, when you retired from the game, how did you and Lisa kind of navigate the new realm that you were in and the jobs? How did you divvy them up? What did it look like?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of dads in particular kind of talk about that. When you come back in, you're trying to find where you fit in, because mum's already established a routine and what works for her. Probably I was fortunate enough that when I was back, I was really invested. I made sure that I could do the school runs, the pickups and everything, as much as I could. So I think she knew that when I was here, I was 100% in, and I'll do whatever, I could to make sure that I could carry some of that load. And I think just trying to find what worked for me, but also making sure that I'm not upsetting her routine too much. And so I think I was, fortunate that, like I say, the things that I could step up or step into around like drop-offs and things that, really took a lot of the load off, but also gave me those little windows to spend a bit of time with the kids and kind of be that cool dad, dropping the kids off to school and picking them up and things like that. But probably some of the hard things were around like routine with like dinners and, maybe I want to stay up a little bit later and chill with the kids, but she's like, no, they got to go sleep early and got to get ready for school, things like that. Whereas now as teens, it's almost the opposite. I'm the guy knocking on the door saying, hey, it's a bit late now, you better go to sleep, mum's getting angry. And so like trying to be the good cop, bad cop, I guess, like any other parent is key now.
Sounds good. DJ, what was your childhood like? And who were the people in your life that were sort of responsible for shaping you?
Obviously my parents were really, I guess, really trusting with me as a kid. Like and I can only kind of compare to, I guess, how I see my kids now. And so I remember like sort of waking up every now and then and, parents are out, but that's because, mum was doing a night shift or dad was leaving early to work. So, my parents would trust me to be okay, to manage myself, to make sure I get ready for school and things like that. And even getting told things like after school, okay, walk to dad's work, then from there you wait till dad finishes and then you go home. If I, fast forward to now, and if I expected that from my kids, or if we expected that from our kids as parents, it's a way different world that we live in, and whether we give them that responsibility or whether we are able to even trust them or the environments that they're in now, it's a different conversation, And so I think for me, I was lucky. I was a pretty diligent kid, and like I say, I was happy to sort of go about my things and what I needed to do, and that was nothing to do with my parents having no time or minimal time. Was really like if they're working, and you just sort of got on with it, and that was kind of, I guess, the approach I had, growing up. So I think it put me in a pretty good place for sports and career and everything else, that I could just go about my work diligently. I didn't really need too much pats on the back or people pushing me along, whereas I know now with both my kids, there needs to be a little bit more encouragement, a little bit more wraparound. And like I say, that's not purely from us as parents, but based on the environments they're in now and the world that we live in. It's I definitely wouldn't be leaving my kids or expecting them to do certain things on their own. Definitely not now.
Now, you're a proud Samoan man. How does your culture shape how you parent? We're like thinking of values, expectations, traditions passed down that you're really intentional about with your kids. Yeah,
I think, to be honest, I wish I probably could enforce a lot more of the traditions or the Samoan culture that I was privy to. Like I know that, like I spoke earlier, like with my mum and obviously with my extended family, we knew what was expected, in our culture in regards to respect, respecting your elders, obedience. And it's not obedience in terms of, not having fun, but, you just knew what needed to happen and when it needed to happen and things like that. And so, if I'm being honest, again, this is sort of us, and me probably in particular being a little bit of a soft parent when it comes to this space. But yeah, no, I wish I probably did instill, and I know that I've still got time to do that. And the kids know when I talk about the Samoan culture and what's expected, those are the standards that I live by. They can see that in me. But in terms of, sort of, when we're in those environments or those spaces and I see either of them, not showing that same respect just because they haven't been immersed in it and it's not sort of part and parcel of who they are. I kind of look at myself going, far out. I wish I did a little bit more. And like I say, I'm still. I think we've still got a few years with my boy, obviously, before he turns 18 and he just decides to do what he wants. But just trying to just to remind them that my culture is what kept me grounded, and it built some really good things in me and how I go about what I do in life. And if I can just remind them that that parts of their culture that will take them a long way. And there's just really like some things that that I guess the world takes for granted, that if they can instill, they're going to be seen as a good person.
My nana passed away just a month ago, actually, and she was like the head of our family, and we all went down. And my kids haven't grown up the same. I can totally relate. But it was so great for them, all coming together and sitting next to, because, bring Nana home and everyone sits and they talk with her and, you all have food and it's really different to what a lot of people have experienced. But my daughter, who's not really been around that, she just sat next to her coffin for ages, not needing a phone or anything to be on, but just sitting there and taking it all in. And she's only 6. And but it made me realise too how much I long for, like my dad used to make a mean chop suey and taro, and I'm like, I made it like twice with him, and he's been gone for 5 years, and I'm like, this year I want to learn how to do that so that my kids, because they're going to be eating and go, "Ugh, what's this?" if they're not exposed to it now.
Well, and both my kids, they have their classic, island dishes that they love. So like that's cool, and then we both of them, like my boy did sivafi, which is the Samoan fire dance for a little bit. So we kind of got that into him. My girl does both Samoan Cook Island dancing. So in terms of that side of culture, like, I think they definitely know that, and they definitely know how proud we are of our culture. But like I say, just when it comes to the little things that, the Pacific cultures do really well, I just wish that, I was probably a little bit harder on them to make sure, and then my kids, I'm talking to them like the respectful kids, they got manners, they all that kind of stuff. But, just, the things, the real customary things, like just, being able to sit and just wait on an order. Not when I say order, but like wait for an, auntie or uncle or a grandparent to say, go make me a cup of tea. Like that was for us, that was the norm. Whereas these kids at a family gathering, they'll still, they'll have fun and all that, but there'll be nothing in their mind telling them that they actually need to go and wait on the elders to make some cup of teas or to, get some biscuits or to get ready to do the dishes. Those things right now, well, for my kids, sort of will be just over their head. But, like I say, it's kind of like, things that I wish that I could have, pushed on them a little bit more. But, like I say, they're great kids. But, those are kind of things that
You're watch out next weekend.
No way.
At the family's house, doing all the cups of tea. Why'd you go hang out with those guys, Dad?
There's a lot to navigate, isn't there, when you are the treasures of your culture that you want to weave through, but you sort of, we slip away, don't we? And then we have to sort of intentionally revisit so that it's planted in our kids. So, DJ, with your kids and your family, what fills your cup? What really enriches you about raising kids?
I guess just, most parents, all of us just want to see our kids, reach their potential. And it's probably cliche, but I think because, in my opinion, because of, and I can only relate to sport, and I guess a little bit on my career, but if you're chasing a goal or you want to be successful at something, there's a lot of things that, come before that. And I can, share that to them and kind of tell them that piece. But it's not that easy, and I guess for me, when I kind of see them on the other side of, sticking it out or, doing something that was hard and seeing a result, seeing the smiles and the joy, or just seeing them, organically enjoy it, or come to me and say, oh, actually, no, this is working, or this is what happened, and a classic example is my girl, who's just sort of started playing footy, like League Sevens, like just anything kind of off a overboard, in the last couple of years. And at the Ames games last year with her team, she got this awesome try in the final, like pretty much like 80 metre, 100 metre try. And she's got some weapons like around her in that team that were always kind of the benchmark. And you sort of tell her, oh, just keep doing this. And, we do all these backyard sessions and trying to get her up to speed, really, because, just to, so she could feel like she could contribute and play at that level. And then to score that try on her own, just it was an awesome try. And then, the smiles, the cheering post that. And it just, the belief. So you kind of think, oh, man, this is kind of what you want, just so the kids can see that, oh, there's that potential that Dad's talking about. For my boy on the other side, he's, like I said, he's a bit of a gamer, has kind of dabbled across sport, but he's starting to really enjoy the gym, and I guess that's kind of probably a teen thing when they start looking in the mirror and they want to, do what their mates are doing or whatever. But, I've been sort of slowly chipping away to kind of just get him active, and most parents will probably think because I'm a footy player that I'm like cracking the whip saying do this and do that, but I just want him to be active, to be healthy. And so now, starting to see him like in the garage, and which I think, in my own opinion, is a lot harder than going to a group class or going to a, in a sport, he has to go into the gym, by himself. And he might be like, doing some weights and then on the phone and whatever, but he's in there by himself. And I know that if you can do, a lot of the work behind the scenes when I was watching, and it's gonna give him merit, somewhere along the way. So I'm just excited that he's slowly sort of turning the leaf and looking after his body and getting into it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And there's so many stages in seed sowing for that to come to pass.
Yeah,
so you've got to wait, don't you, to see it all
wait to see the
come
harvest.
together. Yeah, well, absolutely. And there's wonderful things about parenting, and there's hard stuff too. So what do you find is some of the hardest stuff in parenting, and maybe what stretches you a bit?
Well, obviously, when I have to go away is always hard. I think, and it's probably for my wife as well, around like career decisions for ourselves, knowing that for me in particular, if I was to go down a certain path in terms of my career, it would pull me away from home. And knowing that I've already sort of gone through that phase and I've, committed time away and I've been away, that's gonna definitely test the waters if I, go down that path again. And I think there's, if I'm just like the day-to-day stuff, it's always kind of wondering if you're doing enough. Like you can hope that you're being a good parent and you're raising these standards. And me and my wife talk about like with our boy, he's, once he turns 18, basically he's got the key to, do what he wants. And so you always sort of wondering, man, like if he's up and out, have we done enough? Is he capable to go out there and navigate the world and things like that? And then you start counting down, time, and things like that. So I always sort of wonder, have I given him enough tools, to go out into the big bad world, as well as when you're sort of in those spaces where you've got an opportunity to, to probably decide between two things to push or to support them on, just how do you decide? So like for me, at one stage in his life, I was kind of like, do I need to push more sport on them? Do I need to push more sport on them? But academically, he's really awesome, And then I guess it's the flip side for my daughter, who's like, she's got so much sport. And then there's a part of me going, do I need to pull her back from sport and get her into more class? So, and then because obviously all we're trying to do is give them, life skills that once they do decide to leave the nest, how equipped are they going to be?
Yeah. We'd love a little bit more certainty, wouldn't we, around have I ticked the boxes that need ticking? And
100%.
Yeah, that's a real job of parenting, is we just don't know.
But it's nice to hear other parents, that are going through the motions of, have I done enough? Have I not, because it makes it go, okay, this is just a normal world, like trying to do our best. Just thinking of your career, and you've already talked a little bit about how there's so much stuff that you bring into your parenting. What's some of the things that you've found, from being a captain and all you've done, that you've gone, okay, this works well in parenting, and stuff you've gone, okay, I'm going to have to leave that behind?
Well, I think management, when you're in a team and, you got all these different characters and personalities, you can lead by example, but, sometimes it's about, just pure relationships, and, how you might be able to get the best out of one individual is totally different to how you're going to get the best out of another. And I guess being in our team, we had a lot of different characters, and, I guess I can talk as a young Generation X, there was a Generation Y that come through, and they were, driven and inspired and, everything else by a different type of motivation. So I think definitely I've picked up on that pretty quick in terms of how I sort of manage or get the best out of my kids. I think if we, talk about standards and, there's some attributes sort of along the way that I've kind of like picked up that, that I still use to this day. So I always remind the kids that you've got to be passionate about what you're doing. So like, don't do it because mum and dad, because there's going to be moments, there's going to be times when you don't want to get out of bed. But if you're passionate about it, then you will. Because I can guarantee you they're only doing it for us, that they won't, especially when times like get tough. And then just, probably the other thing is in that space or in the high performance space, you've got to have like a growth mindset. So I think for me, just trying to remind myself that what we may have done, for the first 5 years, is not always going to work for the next 5 years. And just being able to navigate that space, and like in sport, just got to be able to pivot and to change to stay ahead of the game, so to speak. So, finding ways to stay engaged with the kids, was quite easy when they were, 0 to 5 and then 5 to 10. And 10 to 15 is getting hard, so I need to find a new way to stay engaged and to keep connected with them.
So DJ, as a parent now, what do you think kids need most from us when they're playing sport?
Well, I think, support is the biggest thing, and how that looks, I guess, can be quite different. I know with my kids, that resilience piece is a kind of key thing, because it's quite easy for kids these days to kind of go through a little bit of hard, or a little bit of tough work, and decide, okay, it's not for me, and give up. I know that I sort of look back when I was playing sport, you kind of hung in there until you got your first cap or your first chance to play with the team and whatnot. So I think around that support piece is just letting them know that it's not always going to be easy, and it's not always going to be winning or scoring tries or shooting goals and things like that, but just to remind them that that if they stick at it, they'll get their reward eventually. Because I know it's, and again, referring to my kids, my daughter plays a lot of sports now, and there's times when I know it gets tough around whether if she's playing too much, or she's playing as a junior with seniors and things like that. But the kind of, I guess, quote I use with her is around the whole, we're either winning or we're learning. So like if you're in there and you're playing and everything's going well, awesome. You keep smiling. When things aren't going well, if you're not getting selected, or if injuries and everything that comes with sport, as long as she's got that approach that if she's learning, then it's still a win, because it's still going to apply somewhere along the line. And then I guess on the flip side is for my boy, around that support piece, is just reminding them that everything that he's doing is gonna be building up for something. And for me, it's not about the sport, it's about him being healthy. And so the way that I related with him is that physically you might be doing this, and it might not be aligned to he loves basketball, so it might not be aligned to him making a team right now, but there might be still an opportunity to make a team. Or like I say, when it comes to his career, he's talking about being a doctor. So I say, well, you're going to have to be fit, you're going to have to be good at your routine, you're going to have to wake up early. So some of these little things he's starting to learn through a little bit of a little bit of working out in the gym, in the garage, will instill, for him in terms of, a good space for hopefully, whatever career he gets into as well.
I feel like a lot of homes around New Zealand are going to have that written on the fridge or on the bathroom mirror. If you're not winning, you're learning. DJ Forbes. It's good. I'm going to take that.
Yeah, me too.
I'm going to be quoting that with my kids this weekend. Now, you've been an ambassador for Sevens and travelled all over the world introducing kids to the sport. When you look at kids picking up the game for the first time, what do you most hope they'll take away from it beyond learning how to pass or tackle or all those different parts?
Well, I think what I touched on just around the life skills, so learning to work together as a team, obviously, you pick up things around, there's some standards along the way. So being on time, but also, you talk about unity, having a coach, listening to instructions, there's a lot of life skills, I think, that, kids probably overlook from the get-go, because as far as they're concerned, I'm in this team because I want to be, the star player, or I want to score tries, or, we want to get the trophy, which is cool. But, I think, there's an opportunity there for us as parents to say, when you're actually going to learn how to get along with people you never met before. You're going to actually learn how to socialize and talk, because, some of these kids, I know for my kids were quite quiet, quite shy. You sort of go into a sporting team, you're going to have to talk up and communicate and things like that. So I think there's some real basic life skills that probably get overlooked initially, because it's skills. If they can kind of I think stress that part of sport, then again, there's a lot to be learned, and a lot of things to pick up, rather than, at the end of the day, did you win, or did you score this many points or whatever. So hopefully that.
DJ, these days you're working with the Athletes Leaders Network, helping build leadership, well-being and safer environments in sport. Why has this work been so important to you?
Well, I think, I was fortunate enough to be in a position like sort of post rugby to work with the Olympic Committee. And I guess, I was kind of like a horse with the blinkers on going into the environment where I only knew rugby. And all of a sudden working with, all these other sports or member federations across, Olympic and the Commonwealth movement, just really opened my eyes to, I guess, how the other sports were going, as well as what the other athletes were going through. And so, we had a lot set up for rugby players. But I knew, and obviously what I saw in that space was that there wasn't too much else happening for a lot of our other sports. And these are the sports that go to the Olympics and Commonwealth Games like everyone else. So I think for me, it was just an opportunity there to try and help where I guess we saw there was a bit of a gap. And I think at the end of the day, trying to share some of my knowledge in that space around player advocacy or athlete advocacy and just really enhancing athlete voice across the sector. I think at the end of the day, ultimately, if we could have a lot more sport leaders across the sector, it's only going to benefit not just their own sport, but us as a nation. If you've got these leaders that are willing to step up, and give back to their sport, or just to advocate on behalf of the athlete, community, it's only going to hopefully bring good things. And I know there's a lot of stuff sort of going on currently, so it highlights that there is a need for it.
Cool. What did it mean for you being inducted in the Rugby Hall of Fame and more recently the Pacifica Rugby Hall of Fame?
Start feeling a little bit old when you kind of get a Hall of Fame. But I think, in terms of the recent Pacific induction, I think that was a really proud moment. Obviously, I've represented New Zealand and I'm a proud Kiwi, but I'm also really proud of my Samoan heritage. And I think just being acknowledged amongst, my people, our people, my mum's, side was a special moment. And I've always tried to, I guess, put my hand up for Samoa. I remember trialing when Michael Jones was the coach for Samoa, and I've played Auckland Samoa rugby, and I played village rugby, and like I said, I've done the Sivafi when I was young, part of all the school Samoan groups. So I wear my culture literally on my sleeve. So I think it was a nice, a real huge moment. And so obviously with the induction evening around the corner, looking forward to that. And that'll, bring a little bit of pressure around, I'm hoping to do a little bit of a Samoan speech, just to acknowledge and to show, our people that I do care and I do want to do it justice. So, I think it's kind of part and parcel of this age and stage where I'm at, where I do really want to, represent and support our Samoan community as much as I can.
One day your kids will talk about their childhood and the dad they had. What do you hope they'll say about you and the kind of home you created for them?
Oh, shucks. I hope it was a lot of fun. That's the main thing. And I think trying to probably hope that, Dad was a good example. And I know in different aspects of their life, I know there's areas that I can kind of see them looking, some more obvious than others, with my girl playing rugby, playing code. But I think just in the day-to-day stuff, I'm still pretty active. So I think they know in terms of, health is wealth in our family. So that's one key thing that I want them to remember. But in terms of everything else, I think it's about just being a good person, and I'd like to think that they know Dad's pretty quiet, pretty humble when it comes to, I guess, some of the accolades you might have touched on and things like that. That doesn't really count for much, in the household. Just trying to make sure that they know, be a good person, that, Dad created a lot of fun, around the house. And like I say, humility goes a long way. So, hoping a little bit of that as well. And I'll be pretty happy with that.
Good stuff, DJ. Is there any last words you want to say to dads out there? Anything you haven't said?
No, I just think we're all in this together. There's I don't think there's any perfect way of parenting, and I think it's you can look at it like sport. There's going to be some ups and downs, but I think like what I said around that whole, we're either winning and we're learning, so we can do some really cool stuff along the way, and anything that trips us up, as long as we we learn,
Yeah.
in that process. And like sport, we bounce back and we give it another crack for 80 minutes, hopefully,
Awesome.
get the result the next time around. And there's going to be, just like, if I guess now that I'm in it, the analogy of sport, there's going to be fans and critics that will question how you play the game as a dad, and I'm talking about parenting, and at the end of the day, I think, as long as you're happy with, how you do your work, parenting, then, you go to sleep at night happy with, how you do that. And like I say, it's our little team of 4 at home, and we're navigating that space as best as we can, remembering that there's usually a teammate that plays their part. So as long as you've got them on board and you're talking, as you go through the process, then, I think you'll be in a pretty good position come full time when the kids decide to leave the nest. So hopefully that helps.
I love it. There was so much sports chat just then,
I know,
and that's so good.
a little bit of
It's a game of two halves, and at the end of the day, it's so good. It's really cool, and I think it's really encouraging for dads, because we do, like you say, sometimes we're winning, sometimes we can stuff up, and we're learning, and we have to say sorry, and we get to try again, and we're all in it together. I like it. Hey, thank you so much for hanging out.
My pleasure.
It was
Thanks for
so
having
good.
me. Yeah.
Parentingplace.nz is where you will find us if you need another teammate on your I'm trying to tie it in. We are here with courses with parent coaches, and we'd love to support you in your parenting game, in your journey. We'll see you next time.